Hi, welcome to Community Empowerment. I'm Roberta Martin, your host and interviewer. Tonight we'll be talking about elections. And so our conversation is going to center on Minnesota elections. In the studio with me is Senator John Hochman of District 36. And I also have with me in the studio Mr. Christian Sandy. Gentlemen, you are welcome.
Thank you, Roberta, for having me back again. You know, the last time I was on, I gave you a brief overview of the 2015 year and review, and then talked a little bit about the different committees I'm on. And the one that I wanted to talk to you about today was I'm on the Elections Committee. And the Elections Committee really is under Rules and Administration. It's a subcommittee under the Administration and Rules Committee, and it has all bills that are relating to elections, the ethical practices for public officials, campaign finance, which is why with us today I brought in Mr. Christian Sandy, who's the current Vice Chair of the Campaign Finance and Disclosure Board, and next year he's going to serve as the Chair. The other thing that the Elections Committee does is it looks at the redistricting of seats in Congress, the Legislature, and the Met Council. So thank you, Mr. Sandy, for being here, because as we talk about elections, one of them that's going to be there is campaign finance, and that's a lot that you have to bring to the table.
It is a big project for us.
That's good. And Roberta, I just want to go on to a couple of things about elections in general. And as we talk about more about this, the Secretary of State's office really has done a great job making election registration for elections more accessible to people in Minnesota as far as absentee balloting, absentee voting, and as later on I'll talk more about what we did this last year.
Absolutely. So. And I also have questions for you based on those turnout elections too.
Thank you.
So why not we go straight to the point and have Mr. Sandy introduce himself to our audience.
Well, I serve as Vice Chair of the Campaign Finance Board. It's a position that's appointed by the board is overseen by 6 people, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and we are appointed by the governor, and then we are confirmed by both houses of the Minnesota Legislature, a supermajority. It's the only public official in Minnesota that is confirmed by both houses. And we oversee the campaign finance program, all of the spending reports and contribution reports in Minnesota for state elections, both for candidates for office and then also for independent groups that weigh in and make their own expenditures. We also oversee the lobbying program and oversee what lobbyist disbursement reports are, who's spending money to lobby the legislature. And then we also oversee the economic interest disclosure program, where all public officials in Minnesota have to disclose any economic assets or investments that they have so that people can assess potential conflicts of interest.
Excellent. Well, Johnny, do you want us to go a little bit into details about Minnesota election particularly?
You know, that would be great. You know, one of the things that we look at under the election side of the committee I serve on is we wanted to make sure that we made it more accessible for people to vote. Veterans overseas, absentee balloting, for example. We now have, in the past, you used to have to give reasons why you were going to be absent from your district in order to vote. And we finally had the first time no excuse absentee balloting. And so that allowed you to just get your registration and then say, if I'm not going to be there, I'm just going to vote absentee, which I can. It's a right. And then, you know, things that we wanted to get done this past year but didn't was like the early, you know, we wanted to do some early voting, June primary. We wanted to work on restoring the vote for people that had once lost their right to vote. But the one thing that we did put into place this year was the omnibus voting bill that we did, which is Senate File, I think, 455, was to get a task force in place. Was to come back to the election subcommittee with some recommendations regarding school board elections, city council elections, Met Council elections, the whole piece about early voting, the whole piece about elections, and some campaign finance reform stuff. So that's something that we're looking forward to as we start next session. That's why it's going to be important that you know, our new chair is very much in front and gets the task force report that's there.
Well, Mr. Sandy, you know, you handle the money aspect of it. So let's talk about, you know, how finances are raised for campaign. Is it based on, you know, some place that, you know, some kind of nonprofit agency that they go for money, or is it coming from, you know, workers, or is it, where is the money coming from?
Well, that's probably the main thing that our agency is focused on, at least in the coming year. We've seen such an influx of money into Minnesota campaigns. that our goal is to really make it easier for people in Minnesota to find out who's influencing elections, where the money is coming from. And what we see in the state elections is a combination of the money that the candidates raise themselves, but then also the money that independent groups then come in and spend in a district or in the state that really the candidate has nothing to do with, and legally can't have anything to do with, that will come in and say, vote for this candidate because of this reason, vote against this candidate for this reason, but there's no coordination between the two. We've seen a huge change in Minnesota politics now, where in the 2014 House elections, the top 10 most expensive races all spent more than $500,000, which was particularly surprising to me. These are part-time legislative seats that pay about $35,000 a year.
Less than that.
And to get elected to this seat now costs $500,000. But that's a combination of both the campaign expenditures and the independent expenditures, and frankly, the independent expenditures are just dwarfing what a candidate spends on his or her own campaign. The top two most expensive races in 2014, the St. Cloud House race spent $980,000 for one seat in the legislature, and the ratio of independent expenditures to campaign expenditures was 8-to-1. So for every dollar that the candidates were spending, there were $8 being spent by outside groups to influence their elections.
And that's a 2-year seat that you're talking about.
It's a 2-year seat,
right?
so it's going to be coming up again.
That influx of money.
It'll be coming up again next year.
Yeah.
And the same people are running, so the money will be in flux again. You know, we've heard it said that it effectively makes the candidates an independent bystander in their own election, because there's all this money coming in from the outside. Right. Well, now the Campaign Finance Board can't affect that. We don't pass laws. All we do is we take the information, we administer the system. And so our goal now on the board is to make it easier for Minnesotans to find the money, find out who's spending the money, to track it down, because the organizations that spend money, independent groups that spend money in these races, all have very friendly, innocuous names, like, you know, People for a Great Minnesota. And, you know, it's a name that no one can disagree with.
Right.
But it's out there telling you not to vote for somebody. And so I would really like to by this summer, have a system. You know, our new website will be up and going in April. But to really make it easy for Minnesotans to track down and understand and empower themselves. You know, it's a whole other issue to talk about restricting money in politics. My view on the Campaign Finance Board has been that we need to do a better job of handling the information that we have. Right. Reports come to us, and they're on our website right now, but they're not very easily searchable or discernible. The legislature gave us an additional $250,000 a year to our budget a couple of years ago so that we can increase that. Our budget is $1 million a year. And we've been staff has been focused almost exclusively on that. Board members aren't paid, so we're all volunteers. But our hope is to, come April next year, have a website that's out, and really to encourage Minnesotans to find out who is spending this money, track it down. Go to the reports, and it should be very easy. Type in a name. You don't need to have magic words. And inform yourselves about who's spending money and telling you who to vote and why. What's their interest in your race? Right. Why does a large organization or a millionaire not located in Minnesota care who the people of St. Cloud elect to the legislature?
Absolutely. Right. You know, Senator, as I listen to you, there are a couple of things that runs in my mind, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen. In recent times, if not decades, you know, we see people going to the polls during, you know, federal elections, presidential elections. You know, we have massive influx of people just running to vote. But when it comes to, you know, state elections, people don't show up. And what do you think, Mr. Senator Huffman, what do you think could be the reason? There's
been lots of good information and trends out there. In our Secretary of State's on the website, you can go and you can see, you know, who showed up to vote in 2010, 2012, 2014. And you saw when there's a presidential election in Minnesota, I think we get, like, we're number 1 or number 2 in the nation when it comes to voter turnout, 80% and above, right? Well, this last turnout in 2014, was 50.1%. So just north of, or 50.51, 50, so just shy of 51%, just north of 50%, people showed up to vote. Now, that put us in 6th place. Wisconsin did better than us. Maine, Arkansas did better than us. Colorado did better than us, and Oregon. Minnesota was in 6th place. Typically, we'd be in number 1 or number 2. Here's the kicker, but nationwide, the average is 35%. I was at a meeting, environment meeting in Washington, D.C., and then there was a senator from Ohio, and I was complaining that 50.51% of the people showed up in the polls. They said, this just isn't Minnesota, right?
Right.
And so there's a lot of folks that show up during the presidential and they decide to stay home. Begs the question, why are they staying home? We don't know. I mean, that's worthy of discussion right there. He was saying, this was the senator from Ohio, he's like, God, if I had 50%, I'd be doing backflips. They had like 28% or 23% show up at the polls in 2014. So it's not just Minnesota, it's pretty much system-wide.
Right.
And the question really comes up is, what are we not doing? And this is where I think the education and information piece, our Secretary of State's, again, the voting information site that Mr. Simon, Secretary Simon, has put up, it's really good. It's easy to maneuver. It's easy to get around. You can click, and it's not a bunch of PDFs like your campaign, the campaign finance board. It's all these PDFs, and it's like
we're working on that.
He's really done a good job of making it just so interactive and fast that you can get there quickly, and you can move around, and you can register to vote. You can absolutely vote. And you can also he put in place, what's going on in the 2016 election dates, and there's dates that are there because it's not about just showing up to vote for a presidential election year, right?
Yeah.
It's about really getting involved in precinct caucuses, like Tuesday, March 1st.
Let's talk more about that.
Yeah. So on Tuesday, March 1st of this year, you're going to have your precinct. It's easy to find. You go to the Secretary of State's website, go to his vote info area, click on where's my precinct and what times it start, and then find out. Now, a lot of people go, then you got to go through all these rules and all these resolutions, and yes, that's part of the precinct process, which you're sitting there going, wow, dude, this is really, but you know what? It might be bored for some people, but it's really part of what our history's been about in the United States and in Minnesota.
The other thing I can tell you about that, as a member of the Campaign Finance Board, I'm not allowed to participate. The precinct caucus is as far as I can go. I can't be a delegate after that. Statute prohibits my political activity. I can tell you I will go to my precinct caucuses.
Sure.
Partly because it's like a community meeting. It's your small neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of neat because I get to see my neighbors that I don't see otherwise.
Right.
People show up. And the other thing is that they can get bogged down in a lot of these rules, but the reality is the important stuff occurs at the beginning. And so you don't usually have to stay to the bitter end.
Right.
I always tell people the process of the conventions and all that stuff, the precinct caucus is probably the most fun. Because it's your neighbors and you show up and you visit a little bit.
Very community-like.
I will go to mine, even though I've got a good excuse to say I'm in the Campaign Finance Board, I can't be involved in stuff like that. I will go to mine.
Just to go to participate, and that's really where we're going.
To see my neighbors.
See your neighbors and participate and get a feel. A lot of youth voters out there, they're excited, about the national scene that's happening. And when we bring up, well, you're going to go to your precinct caucuses, or you're going to vote in the primary in August. They're like, huh? A lot of them do the process. So maybe perhaps what we can do as a community is educate folks about what Christian's talking about and about doing that. Because there are times that the primary election comes up in August, and then the general election in 2016 is November 8th, and there's still going to be some special elections that are out there as well. But again, our Secretary of State has done a really good job of saying, well, what is it about that I'm going there? Where is it going to be? How can I find out? There's no reason why people shouldn't be able to go on there and access that.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about, the diversities of people. The country's changing. Minnesota has become very diverse, So let's talk about, leaders in elections, and, people that are coming from different parts of the country that have been here for years and now are Americans, and why they are silenced and why they are not getting involved. We have the Oromo community so large here in the United States, yet people are not getting involved.
And go back to 2014. I mean, it begs to bring up the question about where did people go at 2014 that showed up in 2012 and go back to when President Obama was on the ticket in 2008. Wow.
Suddenly, yes.
It was like, where? the
Did
diversity.
everybody came
Everybody
from?
was coming out of everywhere.
Everywhere.
To
So
show
where
up,
were they all these years? And
Exactly.
then all of a sudden.
celebrate those times, but then come back and say, well, what happened in 2014?
I think there's, you know, again, I focus on money because that's what our job is at,
Right.
at the Campaign Finance Board. But I do think that the enormous amounts of money that people saw in the Obama election, but particularly after that, and as it's only coming again now, the people are feeling powerless because there's so much money that they feel, well, my vote doesn't matter. But I do think that, again, it's a great opportunity for us to tell people that, listen, it's not difficult to inform yourself. It's not difficult to inquire about your friends and neighbors as to what's going on. You know, what is this? To you know, the mailings that are coming in, the ads that are coming out to say, well, who is this? What is this?
Right.
Why is it? Why is this going on? And I think that when we do a better job of engaging people and getting, you know, get them to go to their precinct caucuses and providing them with information about what they can do, I think you will see the voter turnout coming back. I think you'll see people showing up. I mean, you know, U.S. history is full of millionaires who ran for office and lost. If you could buy an election, they would, and it would have happened. But, you know, I mean, Henry
Right.
Ford, William Randolph Hearst, both of them weren't able to get anywhere.
Right.
I do think that it's not just money, but I think that people feel like, well, there's these people blowing millions and millions of dollars, and I'm disgusted, and I don't care. And
Right.
the best way to do that is just to take back your government by informing yourself about who these wonderful, friendly, innocuous-sounding groups are that are
Right.
spending $1 million for a Minnesota House seat.
So
Right.
you almost feel
You
like
know.
people aren't empowered. You
Yeah,
almost feel like
people
they're
aren't-
losing some empowerment. I
Yeah.
think this is the name of the show.
That is the
Community
name of the show,
Empowerment.
Community Empowerment. So the question is then, how do we empower them? How do we empower the community? Community
Well,
empowerment.
you
How do
provide
we?
them with you have to let them know what the information is, and
Right.
I'll be the first to admit that the information on the Campaign Finance Board just isn't readily available.
Okay.
That's why we've been so focused on getting our website up and going, and our staff, as our executive director, is spending
Right.
almost all of his time now working on that. But it's not just that. There are other independent groups out there. Anyone who has access to a computer, there's OpenSecrets.org, there's FollowTheMoney.org. All you have to do is go in Google and type in Follow the Money.
Right.
Type in the name of an organization, and you will find very easily where it's from.
Absolutely.
And it is that's the key part of being a voter. And it's not that hard.
You know,
I think it's just telling people it's not that hard to do this. It's not that hard to learn these things. Everyone has opinions,
yeah.
and it's fine with sharing them and letting them know. Do this, learn this about yourself. You've got to go out and get involved in your community.
You know, Roberta, what
Sure.
Christian brought up about it, you know, part of being a voter,
Right, right.
Part of being a voter is understanding the Civics 101.
Sure.
And you know, spending 8 years on the school board that I did, and
Yes.
looking at the education, serving on the K-12 education, we're seeing that push toward the math and science. Everybody's pushing, you know, youth into, and what ends up happening is the social studies and civics stuff gets pushed aside.
Right.
Music gets pushed aside. All of a sudden, you got kiddos focusing on the science, and in which they should,
Yeah.
tech, science,
Science,
math, right?
math, yeah.
But if you all of a sudden you're losing Civics 101, so there's a bill, and I'd like to see come forward either this year or next year, as well as it brings in some more requirements that are saying social studies and civics, because a lot of kids are graduating. Good example was they were interviewing folks on the street. Do you know who the Vice President of the United States is?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
I think Jimmy Kimmel, one of
I
them,
know,
right?
that's
Do you-
all right. The people always get it wrong.
They get it wrong every time.
They get it wrong every time. I look at it more as, you know, you don't need to know that stuff all the time.
Right.
To me, it's more important that when someone has a question, they're able to find an answer,
Right.
and to continue to encourage them to just ask.
Right.
Just ask questions.
Right.
Find out about this stuff. It's coming in your mail like crazy, all these different ads, and you're being bombarded with vote for this person, do all of that. It's not that hard to ask. Start asking people in your community about what's going on.
That's a valid
If
point.
you have access to a computer, go on, or even just before an election, you just, you know, you get a sample ballot in the mail and take a look and say, well, who is this person? By that time, there's so much information out there. I do think that we just need to do a better job in Minnesota
Okay.
of encouraging people to reach out, particularly people who may not ask those questions or may not, frankly, be as interested in it.
Right.
And you just tell them, look, I know you're more focused on the game or your kid's school or what's going on, but
Right.
here's an easy way for you to find out about this.
And I think if
Go
you
to
get
this
back
website,
in,
find
yep,
that out.
I think if you get that in conjunction with getting back to under the Civics 101 or the more of the social studies piece, you start to get people interested in the process
Right.
again.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what you're saying is in conjunction with that, I think we need to do that, which then
Right.
builds up
Right.
the community and
Right.
empowerment side of it.
Right.
People then feel like, no,
Right.
I do make a difference.
Right.
Why did all
Even
these
if-
folks show up in 2008? Jackson Middle School, there were lines around the building.
Yeah,
I mean, it
absolutely.
was so
Zenwood.
people were lined up around the building
Right.
because something got them excited about
Something
being a
got
part of
them
the
excited,
process.
yeah.
And
I think
that
they
would be-
felt. I think also they felt like they were part of something. You know, for the first time. You know, they
Yes.
felt like, well, the race is changing, color is changing, everything is changing. Maybe I feel like I can be empowered a little bit.
I think sometimes there's a little bit of a hangover where people realize that things don't happen as quickly as they want,
Right.
and so then
Absolutely.
they feel like, well, I don't want to show up. It didn't really make a difference
Right.
for me last time.
Right.
Nothing's really changed.
Right.
Change only happens slowly. What I always tell people when when I have to testify at the legislature about what the board is doing. There's always people focused on, well, the board is going to advocate putting in some sort of legislation that'll cut people's ability to spend money, and that's a bit like, no, it's really not. I'm not going to weigh into that fight. If I wanted to, I'd run for office. To me, the bigger issue is, democracy is self-correcting.
Right.
I think.
Absolutely.
And that the
I think
more
so.
that people are engaged, we get all hung up on a specific issue or specific problem.
Right.
It takes us longer to solve it than I
Right.
think most people would want. But
Which he
ultimately,
did
it
run
does
for
get
office.
solved.
One time in his life, he did run
So
for office.
for now, I
years
think
ago.
he's.
I'm fine where I'm at. Fine where I'm
He
at.
said he's fine where he at now.
But I do think that it takes us longer to get problems solved,
Right.
and it's telling people that you can't just. I know you feel disappointed.
Right.
You got to keep coming back.
We
you
get
gotta
in
stay
there. We
involved.
get in there. Right. So, Senator, let's talk a little. 2016 is right around the corner. We have 6 minutes. Would you, Mr. Sandy, would you please talk a little bit about what is the agenda for 2016 for the state agency?
The state agency is first and foremost to get our website up and going. It's already there. The information's there, but I want it to be very user friendly. And
So it's kind of like precise and very not too much in depth and.
Right. What we want it to be a fully functional, modern, usable source so that people can go to this source that the taxpayers of Minnesota paid for, bought and paid for, that it's there for them. And then secondly, let's take our show on the road and tell people, here's how you find out about this information.
Right.
I'm really not as interested in enforcement or investigations of organizations on spending. My focus has always been on the board that, enforcement exists just to preserve the integrity of the data that we have.
Right.
I'm not out to nail someone for some technical violation. It's not an interest of mine.
Absolutely.
I do think that we can do a better job of getting information out for that. And then once we've had a chance to digest the information that we have, then another of our statutory functions is to advise the legislature about some possible changes. People say, well, what about all this money that's coming into politics that's not reported? And I say, well, I can't tell you how much is unreported because by definition it's not, but there's an awful lot that is reported that we just don't tell people about very well.
Right.
Once we get a handle on what's out there and we're able to identify, well, there's an awful lot of activity that's not being reported to us, then I can go to Senator Hoffman's committee and tell them, here's some changes I think we should do. But I don't want to start proposing legislation without some good data background, and frankly, without the people of Minnesota indicating to the legislators that they're bothered by something. They're troubled by it costing $500,000 to get elected to the legislature.
Right.
And there's a couple of things to go with that. As we look at the 2016 session, last year we tried to bring a campaign finance disclosure piece in, which I think addresses some of what Mr. Sandy's talking about, which is really informing, you know, the voters and who the person is that is represented there. I mean, the
Right.
money's coming from someplace, and there were some restrictions. I think it was $5,000 you had to disclose, because right now in some of the larger pieces, they're like, well, where's that money really coming from? Is it coming from the people who feel good about themselves, or is it, you know, I mean,
Right,
making
right.
up where you were going with that? But really, it's got to be coming from somebody, someplace. And there's some
Absolutely.
more disclosure, which I'm sure you guys are going to have some more discussion on.
Well, we've taken a run at it 3 times now
Yep.
in 3 years at the legislature, and there just hasn't been appetite, a broad appetite at the legislature. And the governor's made it clear that he's not going to sign legislation regarding elections that doesn't have bipartisan support.
Right.
Okay.
So we've decided on the board to take a breather
On that one.
on that
disclosure?
issue, because
Okay.
we decided, look, until the people of Minnesota reach out to the legislators, I don't think you're going to see that appetite to get the energy behind that bill to have it done. So I'm not going to keep spending our agency resources and our staff money beating our head against a wall that the people of Minnesota just don't seem to
Right.
be telling the legislators they want done.
And that's interesting. It was, I think it was Senator Carlson who had that bill last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know who had, maybe Senator Eakin or Newman had it the year before that. But it'd be interesting to see him bring that back. And,
There's
you know,
an issue out there.
Yep.
We've always had a very vibrant discussion at the legislature, but in 3 successive sessions, we've not been able to get it passed, which to me, that just says the people are telling us something.
Right.
You
It
know,
got to be-
let's take a break. Let's
Right.
get some more information, and also I want to focus on getting information to the people, because what a novel idea to have legislative
Right.
ideas coming from the
Absolutely.
people rather than from us
From
telling
us.
them what they
and
need.
it's interesting you say that, because you know, one of the things that folks told us was they wanted to be able to register to vote when they renew their driver's license. That
Right.
didn't make it through, right? Some mail balloting out in the rural areas. You want to be able to mail by, you know,
Right.
balloting
Absolutely.
by mail. Getting younger voters registered, that was one that the Secretary of State brought that made a lot of sense to me.
How
It's-
young? 18?
Well,
though.
no, yeah, they're saying, well, 18 is when they're going to vote, but they got to maintain a residence for at least, if you're 16 years old and you've been in Minnesota, you can get registered. So you're registered. Doesn't mean you get to vote, but the fact is now I'm a registered voter in Minnesota. When I know I turn 18, I'm there. I mean, that was the whole
Right.
premise behind that, was to try to get more youth involved, empowered, so to speak, on that
Yeah.
side of it. And then some early voting. The early voting
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
piece didn't make it. And of course, I mentioned earlier, restoring the vote
Absentee.
didn't make it as well. So I'm sure all that's going to come back again. The other one was the incarcerated person's actual address. That one was last year. The conversation was, if I live in a facility, my address comes up as the facility, when really my actual address is 123
Different,
Main Street.
yeah.
And so it's really getting it back to
Back
saying
to-
it's 123 Main Street.
And so that is all coming back in
Yeah,
this
just
new
I think
26?
I would, because those
Yeah,
were
soon.
provisions we wanted to see get through, and they just
Absolutely.
kind of disappeared.
Yeah,
in
we should
the
talk more
process.
about that when we come next time, so that we have people know if it comes in 2016,
Yeah,
so
I mean,
we
there's
can
some
get
good
people ready.
out there.
You know,
Yep. I think
Right.
folks like Sarah Walker, who are really
Yeah.
working on the restorative justice side of that thing. People like that would be good to maybe.
we
bring
have
in.
about a minute left, Senator. So you are running for election. Walk us through that. He is the one running.
I am. He can't. I brought you the current. They're going to be the chair. They can't.
Yeah, and Chad, you are about to run too for Minnesota Secretary of State.
That was a
Are
long
you
time
going? Are you
ago.
tking
That
about
was
going
many,
again?
many years ago. No, he
He said he's fine where he's at.
And,
That's 10
we'll have
years
our
ago.
we'll have our hands full overseeing this election.
Oh, this is going to be an interesting year. When I ran in 2015, there was 47 lit pieces dropped against me, and almost $500,000 dropped against me, and that was from those third-party investors. And so, you're right. When you're looking at an 8-to-1 ratio, it's not there. But I think it's important that we get the information out for people to get involved in their local caucus and go meet their neighbors and get involved. I'd love to see a groundswell like 2008 again.
Right.
That would be exciting to
That
me.
would be exciting.
And so we can do that.
Sure. It's been great having you, gentlemen. And
Thank
I
you.
can't wait to go to
Thank
the
you
next
very
one.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure
Good to see
having
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
seeing us again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, good night. So we should be talking.